What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Make It Kustom. I'm Carl Fisher, and today we are back on this 1932 Ford split grill project here. It's for the 1931 Model A Roadster we're building with the Duval windshield. So in this video, what I'm going to cover is fitting and welding these pieces in. So we've shaped these from 18 gauge sheet metal, done a couple videos making those pieces. So check back, I'll put the links in the description. This video is going to focus on fitting and welding. We are going to TIG weld this into the grill shell and control distortion, as well as fit these pieces as perfect as possible. So I'll be going over all that in this video. Don't forget to like, click subscribe, hit notifications. Let's get into it. All right, well, first things first with this grill, we are gonna have to fit these pieces a little bit better until they are ready to be actually welded in. What I'm gonna do is I'm going to start by actually fitting and welding, or I should say fitting and tacking this main centerpiece in to the top of the grill. I'll end up having to trim the bottom and fit that really well. And then the final pieces will be these because they are a little bit different. And as we fit them in, we will tweak them to be identical. All right, so got that piece cut off and we are just kind of in the beginning stages of fitting, just kind of checking it to where I scribed it off, and it is fitting pretty well. I did use just this nice little scribe here. I like to use fat Sharpies. I learned this trick from Ray Chalene. They just work great for using to mark things out as like layout die or anything that you would use die chem for, which is like that machinist blue stuff. A fat Sharpie works awesome, so check that out. These are Clecos. These are just kind of like aircraft temporary rivets. So when you push them with the Cleco pliers like this, when you push them with Cleco pliers, they just kind of do that and then they lock. That's how I'm fitting these pieces on. I like to use these cookie discs. I call them cookie discs. They're made by 3M. They're just these kind of spaghetti looking discs. They're for paint stripping. We're really good at not removing any material and only removing paint, so that's what I used for that. And then just a purple roll lock. These are from 3M again. They don't sponsor me, but they do have good stuff and it is worth the extra money because these wear like iron. One of these discs, they're Cubitron roll locks. They work like 3 or 4 of, you know, the other kind. Anyway, I'm not trying to plug them, just letting you know what I'm using. And yeah, so the next step now is just to get as close a fit as possible. You want tight gaps everywhere, especially when TIG welding, even when MIG welding, any kind of welding, the tighter the gap, the less distortion there will be. Think about it, if two panels are touching each other and you go to weld it, the panel is touching in front of the weld, so it's like fighting the shrink of the weld, so you're not going to shrink as much. Anyway, that's that. So I'm gonna fit this piece on. I'm gonna get this piece tacked in very good everywhere. I'm gonna trim the bottom a little bit, get that kind of tacked on. And now once this is in place, I will definitely be taking out the, well, before I put it in place, I'll take out the rest of the wire that's in here. And then this piece is tacked on. We'll start fitting these other pieces. Now, one of them is not as well made as the other. This one fits much better than this one, and it's because I rolled too much of the edge over, so I'm going to correct that at the same time when we are fitting everything together. And it's really just one of those things. You got to just kind of work at it step by step and try and get things as close as possible. And yeah, let's get it done. Okay, so I'm about ready to tack this in. Now, when I'm lining up sheet metal panels, doesn't matter if I'm MIG welding or if I'm TIG welding, I'm always looking to start tacking from one end and move away from that beginning tack. You could potentially do like a center tack and then move away from both directions, or you can start at one end and move to the outside, but you never want to start from like the outside and move in, because you don't know where this sheet metal is. If it's slightly up or slightly down, it's going to eventually collect or misalign. So that's why you want to have your tacks start from one point and move along. So that's what I'm gonna do now. I've just got a 1/16 tungsten. I'm probably at about 60 amps, throttling with a foot pedal. And I'm just gonna tack from one end to the other. If my tacks tighten up, like what I mean by that is as I'm tacking, the weld is shrinking a little bit, so it is potentially going to pull the two panels together in front of where I'm tacking. And if that happens, you don't want to just start cutting that and allowing it to keep shrinking. You want to hammer on that previous tack so that it can spread that tack back out, therefore spreading the sheet metal back out so that you can continue to tack. You don't want to keep trimming your gap, because it's actually going to shift the panel over and create even more warpage. So that's a trick that you'll probably see me do, because you end up doing that a lot, because a tight fitting weld seam is going to want to pull together and misalign. So we're always trying to have no gap in sheet metal. I'm not trying to put a gap in there. That's just how I do it, and that's what I'm going to do here. So I'm starting off with just fusion tacks wherever it's nice and tight, and fitting perfect. Manipulating the sheet metal here to make sure it lines up where my next tack's gonna be. I'm using a 040 filler rod. You can also use just like your MIG welding wire. I find it easier to buy the 040 stuff, but what you can do is if you use MIG welding wire, like 035 MIG welding wire, you can clamp one end in a vise, the other in your drill, and you twist it, and then it makes it straight if you're going to use it as filler wire.
Alright, so this is where I have tacked and the sheet metal has pulled itself together and overlapped. So I'm right now holding a dolly on the back side and hammering directly on the tack on the dolly to stretch the tack out, therefore spreading the gap of the pieces of sheet metal so that they can align once again. I'm always trying to adjust every little bit I can to make sure that the panels get tacked together in the correct orientation to each other. Like, they need to be flush, and as nice as you make them, it's worth it because that's your weld that's locking it in.
Get Curtis, get Curtis! He's a sitting duck! No, I'm not. No, I'm a running duck! No! Alright, so this is where we're at with the welding and tacking and fitting. So like you saw, I did start at one end and just kept lining them up, going from one end to the other. And I didn't really have much trouble with the joint tightening up on this bottom spot, but I did have it here. So what you saw was me hammering a tack to open it back up so that these pieces of metal could be flushed together again, rather than one pushed over the other. So I'm just saying it again because this is like a really important thing when you are tacking anything together. So I want everybody to fully understand this. If I'm tacking here and then I tack here, and each time I tack, it shrinks a little bit. So I tack one, tack the next one, it pulls in, tacks the next one, it pulls in a little bit more, then these two panels might overlap. And your first instinct is always to cut those and let them fit again. That is not the best way to go. The best way to go is to hammer directly on the tack. Actually, there it is. Hammer directly on the tack, and it will spread it apart and give you the clearance needed to line those panels back up again. If the panels line up and you're tacking, the only thing that could be affecting it is the tacks. So just the fact that they shrink in a little bit, and you can hammer them against a dolly on the back side with a hammer on the front side to bring them back out so that you can keep tacking. It's worth that explanation. So hopefully you guys are getting a bit from this. Just take your time, line things up, start at one end, move along, or if you wanted, in this case, I would say you could start in the middle and move each way, but for me, I always like to just start at one end and move to the other side. I just find that it is easier to continuously get a nice, even gap. And this is, like you see guys when they grind their welds down and they can get it to the point where you don't even see one side or the other of the weld. That is from lining it up at this stage right here. And we're even gonna get it closer, okay? So next, now that we've got, say, like 1 inch to 1.5 inch spacing, holding everything together, I'm actually going to tack in between each one of these. Basically, I want 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch in between each tack. So that means that I need to add more tacks. And that is so that when you decide to weld it, the weld is not warping in front of your weld puddle. See, if I were to try and weld this all the way over, by the time I got to the middle, there could be so much heat in here that it's trying to move the panels like this. Okay? So if I've got a couple of more tacks in there, then it's held strong enough that it will not misalign the panel as you're welding. So that is very important. So next up, I'm going to tack on in between each one of these and actually get them all the way locked in. And then once we're there, you can actually fully weld this. Like, you don't have to jump around. You don't have to do any kind of, like, you know, special patterns or anything. When this is secured, we can weld all the way. Like, you can just weld the whole thing. And it's, well, I'm gonna explain that when we get there. There's tricks to that as well. Okay, now that we have our tacks every 1/2 inch or so, the next step is very crucial before welding. It's very tempting to just go ahead and weld everything because it's lined up pretty good. It could be better though. So what we want to do now is I want to hit each one of these tacks that has a little bit of weld on it. I just want to take the tips of the welds off, and then I want to hammer these all flat. So what I'm going to actually do, I mean, you can use a hammer and a dolly, you can use, you know, hand hammers, you could even use a planishing hammer here. We could certainly use the planishing hammer that I have, but I'm going to do this by hand just to show you guys. I am going to use a steak dolly on the little steak tray there. And so once I grind these off, I'll take the grill over and I'm just going to hammer this stuff to make sure that both these panels are completely aligned as well as they can be. They will be perfect, okay? So once that's totally hammered, nice and flat, then we know that when we fully weld that, it's gonna have perfect panel alignment, and we will only be grinding off the weld. You know, we're not gonna have any issues of, you know, trying to clean up this surface and sand it and sanding through in spots because something was higher than the other. That is the next step. So for this work right here, you wanna make sure that you're hitting hammer on dolly, meaning that you wanna kinda like listen and feel for the hammer striking directly on the dolly underneath the sheet metal. What that's doing is it's pinching your hammer and dolly together with the sheet metal in between to align it. So right now I'm not trying to stretch per se, maybe a little bit is happening, but what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to hammer and planish multiple hits to pinch the two levels of sheet metal in the joint so that they are nice and flat. I've done that already quite well on this side. It's all lined up very nice. I know that when I weld that, it's going to be nice and smooth and well aligned. So I'm gonna do the same here. It might be a little bit tricky getting in here, but because it's so tight to a curve, the weld will probably be able to smooth out. I think this joint will be okay. I'll try and get it a little bit better, and then I'll have to go to something with a sharper radius to get into this area here, which I'll probably end up using just the large diameter T-dolly to kind of planish that front area. But I'm just gonna planish the rest of this, then use the T-dolly for the front areas. Maybe I'll get a little bit out of this back edge, and then we are ready to weld. All right, so what is the trick with TIG welding thin sheet metal? So for me, this is the trick. The trick is consistency and a tight fitting setup, okay? So like, I think that TIG welding is 90% fit and 10% welding, because when something fits perfectly, it becomes easier to weld, right? So if you've got a tight, consistent gap the entire way, keyword is consistent, right? If you've got, you know, a 10 thou gap or a 50 thou gap or whatever, it's more important that it's consistent. And the reason I say that is because when you have a consistent gap, that means that when you're TIG welding, your amperage can be consistent, your travel speed can be consistent, and when your amperage and your travel speed are consistent, that means that your heat input into your metal is consistent, all right? And now, why do I keep saying consistent? And the reason is so that it warps consistently. You're not gonna be able to say that welding doesn't warp metal. It does, right? So we know it does. It shrinks metal when it's heated and then cooled, right? So we're just trying to control the distortion to the best of our abilities. And the way that we do that is being consistent with our travel speed, consistent with our gap, so that our amperage can be consistent, because your amperage changes when you go, you know, when you have to fill more, or you have to, you know, add more filler material, or you've got a wider gap or less of a gap, your amperage is going to change. So your heat is going to change, and the change in heat, like if I'm hot here, cold here, hot here, cold here, it's going to warp differently. So consistency is key. We want to consistently, and with as little warpage as possible, weld this whole thing. And that's why it doesn't matter if you hop around or do anything, is because we're just trying to get a consistent weld. And you'll see that the heat rainbow kind of penetration lines, those heat lines, if you've got consistent travel speed and consistent heat, those lines should be relatively consistent as you're welding it. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm going to weld, starting from this end, I'm gonna weld. I'm just gonna weld the whole thing. I'm gonna weld the center as well. I'm gonna try and keep the center a little bit cooler because I wanna make sure that I'll be able to file up that peak into there. But I'm just gonna go for it, just straight weld it. All right, so we're all welded up. Like I said, nice even amount of heat because we've got an even travel speed and an even gap in our material. So this weld was relatively consistent as I was moving along. I did kind of dab really fast. You probably saw me. I was just trying to deposit a little bit more filler material in this to make it a slightly colder weld like I was speaking about. I was just adding a little bit more filler material because it takes the heat away I shouldn't say that. How do you explain that? The more filler material you have, the more energy is used melting the filler materials, so it makes for a little bit colder weld. You're able to just kind of like build it up a little bit more. Anyway, whatever. Yeah, nice and consistent, and because it was all lined up prior to welding, like there is very, very little warpage here. Also, whenever you've got compound curves, your warpage will be less than anything flat because the compound curve kind of helps to hold that shape. So I think that we're gonna have a really good time grinding this. Like I think it's gonna come out quite nice with very little planishing. Like after this, we can hammer it again because it's a TIG weld, and we can smooth it out, you know, perfect. All right, I'm gonna stop the video here. There's lots more to cover on welding in those pieces, tuning up the center pieces. I do have it done now, but just there's so much footage and I just didn't wanna cut it down. I feel like there's a lot of great stuff covered in this sheet metal TIG welding video. So, quick sneak peek, there it is. Thanks everybody for watching Make It Kustom. I appreciate all the support. You know, it's just awesome. So thank you everybody, I really appreciate it. japhandskustoms.com is the merch store, as well as where you can get your own Mother Tucker shrinking hammer and stump kit. You can also buy one or the other if you already have a shrinking hammer. This is a nylon headed hammer, 6061 aluminum with you know, set screws holding the pieces in place if we were to ever wear them out, or if we're gonna have different profiles later. It's a hickory handle, 16 inches long. It's actually pretty big. It moves metal very fast. The strap kit comes with the straps, the nylon plate, literally everything you need to make your own shrinking stump at home. All you need to supply is the lumber. So you even get the rounded grinding disc, all the hardware, nylon plate. You can buy it either as a kit, save a little bit of money, the Mother Tucker shrinking stump with the Mother Tucker hammer, or you can buy each one's individually if you want on the site. That leads me to the custom crew. If you want to be a part of the custom crew, it's only $5 a month and it's on YouTube. The link is in the description, as well as there's a button at the end of the video, but you get 15% off on the merch store, as well as the shrinking stump kit. If you're gonna buy that, it's a way to save some money. Free shipping, continental US and Canada right now on those things. And yeah, I just really appreciate everybody. This has been amazing so far, the whole metal shaping journey, and there's more to come on the grill, as well as we're gonna jump back into some of the other projects. Another thing I wanted to mention is that I will be going to visit Brent at Half-Ass Customs. I'm heading out there like in a few days. We're gonna make some content together, as well as do a little bit of metal shaping. We're gonna visit DD's Speed Shop. We're gonna talk, yeah. And I'm actually gonna drive one of his cars home. So stay tuned and definitely check him out if you haven't already. Half-Ass Customs, Customs with a K, link in the description as well. Go give him a follow, awesome content, super great guy. Really excited to go see him. So him and his wife Esther, they're amazing. They came here and helped on the ramp truck build last December. If you haven't seen that, check that out. Anyway, thanks everybody. We'll catch you on the next one. Stay tuned.